Let's talk about Ben Brereton Diaz joining Sheffield United on loan. I don't know the wages. I expect the wages that Sheffield United will be paying to be high, probably over or around 50 grand a week. He's 24. He'll be 25 in April. Ben is a right-footed forward who can operate as a striker. He can operate on the left wing if required, maybe just the left side of strikers. Perhaps he could see Archer and Diaz maybe playing behind a striker, or the two of them through the middle. Brereton Diaz out wider, on another player on the right. We will wait and see. At Stoke-on-Trent born, his Chile story is well documented, and I don't really need to go into the finer details of that. Ben is 6'1" tall, started his youth career with Manchester United from the age of 7 to 14. Then Stoke City, going back to where he grew up until 2015. He was there before getting that professional football career underway at Nottingham Forest, where with the not so tricky trees at times, he scored 9 in 57 appearances. So an okay return, but nothing that's going to pull up any trees. Blackburn Rovers followed, and that is where his career blossomed. That's probably enough metaphors related to foliage of any kind. But it blossomed at Blackburn after a fashion and after a time, because not initially. He seems to be a bit of a slow starter, so not ideal when you're talking about a loan when we're looking at just the remainder of this season. But after a couple of seasons at Blackburn Rovers, he really kicked into gear. So if we look at season 21-22, he scored 22 goals in just 37 games, then 14 goals in 43 games. So 176 appearances in total for Rovers, with a healthy 47 goals returned. He even registered 16 assists. In Spain with Villarreal, his next destination, the worst kept secret in football, that transfer. And when he arrived, he's only started twice. So he's arrived hoping to be first choice. That hasn't happened. He's been subbed on 11 times and no goals. There's that slow start again. The Yellow Submarines have also been struggling themselves, 13th in La Liga with 9 defeats after just 18 matches. For the Chilean national team, he's bagged 7 in 27. That's a healthy return, even scoring against Argentina. Of course, he's never played in the top flight of English football, so no Premier League stats for me to draw on and share with you. He has played in the top flight in Spain, and that hasn't gone to plan. So what we'll do is we'll look at his overall championship record. So when we go played, scored, assisted, if we look at kind of how it's gone and the coaches he's played under, the coaches to get the best out of him, well, Jon Dahl Tomasson and Tony Mowbray. So for Jon Dahl Tomasson, played 50, scored 16, 4 assists. Tony Mowbray played 127, 31 goals, 13 assists. So in total, 213, 53 goals, 21 assists when we are talking about that championship record. And what are his strengths? Well, he's a decent dribbler, and when on form and when everything seems to be going right mentally, because that's where he seems to get his consistency from, I think he needs to feel comfortable in his surroundings. But once he gets going, and his finishing is really good. Takes a nice penalty. He scored 9 from 10 in his career, including one against Sheffield United. You might remember that one in the Cup. Has above average technique. He's composed, determined, a team player, excellent work rate. He is quite quick, naturally fit, good strength and stamina. Perhaps not the strongest, but definitely with that work rate, that stamina comes along with it. In terms of injuries, only one major one. That was in the 21-22 season, an ankle ligament tear, nasty, where he missed 41 days of football. He seems to be disciplined, only getting sent off once. That's all the way back in 2020. And if you want to know when he scores his goals, it seems prudent to leave him on or bring him on as a second half sub, because Brereton Diaz, the time that he scores is the second half. Let's take the 21-22 season as an example. He scored just 6 in the first half for Blackburn that season, but 16 in the second half. For Forest, even in one of his poorer seasons, that's why I picked this one, back in 2017-18, he scored 1 in the first half of the games and 4 in the second. So in total, in his career in England, it's 20 goals in the first half, 38 in the second. Nearly double. And compared to positional peers, if we go the men's big 5 leagues, Brereton Diaz ranks in the 94th percentile for successful take-ons per 90, averaging just 2 per 90. He also ranks in the 98th percentile for progressive passes received, 10.33. So he will look to get into dangerous areas, receive the ball, and drive at opponents, be they fullbacks or possibly centre-backs, depending on where he plays. On the less positive side, in terms of non-penalty XG, he ranks in the bottom percentile. His touches in attacking penalty area is a low tally for a forward-thinking player, less than 5 per 90, which certainly reflects on his XG numbers. Now, even if he is on, let's say 50 grand a week, and we're paying all of it, that's only, 1.2 million for 6 months? That's not a big risk. It's not a big waste. I want to know your thoughts on this one as well, and I thought it might be prudent to get the thoughts of a Blackburn Rovers fan. I'd now like to welcome Jacob, Blackburn Rovers' contributor. It's a welcome back to the Sheff United Way, because we spoke to you before when we were talking about 𝗍𝗿𝗂𝗏, which didn't really work out for Sheffield United. How have you been?
I've been good, thank you, Al. And yeah, didn't end up working out the way I suppose you were hoping. Going to talk about another Rovers, ex-Rovers wide kind of forward, I suppose, today. Hopefully you have some better luck with this one, I suppose.
Well, you've just touched on where I was going to begin, actually, because you've called him kind of like a wide forward. So Ben Brereton Diaz, in your opinion, where is his best position?
I would say definitely the left wing, left forward sort of area. There was a couple times where we actually played him up front in a 2 with 𝗍𝗿𝗂𝗏𝗏 under Tony Mowbray, and we did actually have a good period. I remember we went to Stoke and away and we beat them 1-0. 𝗍𝗿𝗂𝗏𝗏 actually scored a really good goal, but most of Brereton Diaz's time and his best moments for Rovers came from that left forward sort of area. There were times where we played him down the middle with two men to his left and right, and he really struggled there. As I said, in a 2 up top, he kind of had someone to play off a little bit with 𝗍𝗂𝗏𝗏. I think he weren't as uncomfortable in that kind of position. I don't think he probably has the physique or the attributes really to be able to be down the middle, kind of, get his head onto things, have a big centre half, bustling him and whatnot. Out wide, you look at some of the goals from not last season, the season before. Just he got 20 goals before New Year rather, in that season, and yeah, just the amount of times he cut in on that right foot and bend one in.
That's what we want to hear about, actually. The fact that he can do that is exciting. It whets the appetite for Blades fans. And I'll ask you this question as well: will he cut it in the Premier League? And of course, the reason I ask you that is you saw him play in a league below, and he comes from La Liga, which you'd say, of course, is the Spanish equivalent of the Premier League, and he hasn't scored goals there.
I guess that is the golden question, I suppose. I think in terms of his move to Villarreal, I think obviously it made sense for himself in a way of, obviously, he's got the Chilean fan base behind him. Obviously, they're Spanish speaking. Kind of made sense for him to go to Villarreal in that aspect. But in terms of his actual kind of play style, I think he does suit the English game more. He's not the most technically gifted kind of player in some ways. They obviously maybe a bit of a tiki-taka kind of way, which I expect he probably is expected to play at Villarreal maybe. I think at Sheffield United, you'd probably see some more out of him than you would at Villarreal. I think he's been starved for minutes at Villarreal as well. Obviously, it is a big club over there in Spain, probably that top 6 kind of region. Is he a top 6 La Liga player? No, I'll be honest. Obviously that is such a big jump up from a Blackburn Rovers side where, we have a young side and not strapped for cash by any means. And it's a big jump up. And maybe he's took kind of one step too far, and coming back to English football, aside, obviously you're struggling, but there were times where he'd play for us and we'd be struggling, but he'd be the kind of man to grab the ball and bend one in. Just when that step up from Championship to Premier League is so huge for, and at times I think Rovers fans would say maybe a bit of a one-trick pony with the cutting in and bending it in. would he get those opportunities in the Premier League? I guess that remains to be seen. I mean, you look at someone like Adam Armstrong, he got 28 goals for us during that COVID season, did brilliantly, and then goes to Southampton, and I think he got 2 goals in 2 seasons in the Prem. It is such a big jump up, and obviously he's doing well this season. Now he's back in the Championship, Adam Armstrong. So I suppose we'll see. But I mean, I thought you had that option to buy, which is a shame because obviously, you know, I think maybe most Blades fans are kind of resigned to the fact that you probably will find yourself back in the Championship next year. He would be a good player for you. But I suppose we'll see. I'd love to see him do well in the Premier League and go back to Villarreal and maybe get a few more chances.
Well, it does remain to be seen. You're absolutely right. I think the Armstrong comparison is an interesting one. And how was Ben Brereton Diaz when he was with you in his final season at Rovers? Because he'd already kind of decided to leave. It was one of the worst kept secrets in football, wasn't it, that he was going to go when his contract ran out? And many people knew, of course, it was going to be Villarreal. How did he actually perform in that final season?
I think for the first half of the season, he got about 10, 11, 12 goals, something around there. And then after January, I think a pre-contract was already kind of signed. It weren't announced or whatnot, but as you're saying, I think it was blatantly obvious he was not going to be re-signing with Rovers. And he did tail off in truth. You know, between January to summer, a lot of Rovers fans didn't actually want him in the team. A lot of that would be, you know, bitterness, I suppose, that he isn't re-signing. But his performances didn't warrant it, in truth, I'll be honest. But, you know, obviously, when your head's kind of elsewhere, you know, his head was already in Spain, really. You kind of maybe don't put 110% in like you maybe used to, maybe pulling out of kind of certain 50-50s, stuff like that, as players do, and I think it's totally natural. And he did struggle. You know, he decided to turn up on the final game of the season for us, which was a bit too late, unfortunately. Bagged himself a couple of goals against Millwall, which saw their playoff kind of hopes fall out the window. I think obviously he needs this opportunity. He's going to be hungry for it. He's going to be hungry to get as many minutes as he can. Obviously, you know, he needs to come to Blades and impress, really, else, you know, there's a good chance Villarreal may offload him in the summer if they don't see anything kind of there. They picked him up on a free. So, you know, if they were to sell him for, I mean, I can imagine you'd probably get at least 10, 15 million for him still. You know, he needs to impress, really, if he does want to keep his place at Villarreal.
I think absolutely true. And for them, they'll look at it because they got him on a free as, you know, making a profit, whatever they sell him for. What are his weaknesses, in your opinion?
It's a good question. I think, like I said before, maybe a bit of a one-trick pony with the cutting in and bending it in. There were times where my mind goes back to 𝗍𝗲𝗀 linking up with him again against Preston at home. We won the game 1-0, and 𝗍𝗲𝗀 whipped a brilliant ball in, and it's a glancing header and he puts it in. But we didn't really see enough of that kind of side of his game for a big lad, really. I mean, he's, you know, I think he's 6'2", 3", something like that. He's not the smallest. He's quite big, as in broad as well. Has a bit about him, but maybe those kind of physicality aspects. I mean, especially when he first joined Rovers, the first 2 seasons he had with us, he only scored 2 goals, and we bought him for 7 million. So we weren't particularly happy with that at that point. I think he grew into his body somewhat, but as I was saying before, I think going up against a fullback, he suits that more than, you know, that lone kind of striker down the middle. He just does not have that in him. He's a workhorse, to be fair to him. He'll run up and down that line. He'll help defensively. But yeah, I'd say maybe a bit of a one-trick pony, and physicality against any centre-half. If you were to play him down the middle, I'd expect he'd really struggle, especially in the Premier League.
Interesting. I always want to end on a positive. So if you were to highlight the best things about Ben Brereton Diaz, really get us excited, what are his main strengths?
A workhorse. for Rovers, you know, other than maybe those last 6 months, you could say he was always one to work his socks off. He'll get back defensively, and then, you know, he'll be on his bike down the left wing for a counter attack, cutting in on that right foot. You know, he can just bend one in, really, I suppose. And if you get a purple patch out of him, you get a purple patch out of him. I think he's the type of player, if he hits the ground running at Sheffield United, you know, there's a good chance he could maybe get you 5 to 10 goals between now and the end of the season. But if he doesn't, I could quite easily see him not get any. I think he's one of those. He's either very much hit or miss. There were never kind of a period for Rovers where, you know, he'd just get a goal every kind of other game, or, you know, every 3-4 games, something like that. It was always either he'd go weeks and weeks and weeks of being torrid, or he was just absolutely on fire. So I guess you just kind of have to hope that he play to his strengths. He gets that goal in, you know, his first kind of couple games, I suppose, hit the ground running, and then just find his confidence again. I think obviously he must be quite shot for confidence right now. Probably feels a bit out of his depth in La Liga, strapped for minutes. But to come back to maybe more familiar surroundings, obviously, you know, going to Spain, he's just actually had a kid whilst he was with us. So a lot of kind of changing factors, I would imagine, for him behind the scenes, on top of having a kid, having to move to a different country, learn a new language, which, you know, obviously he's learning a bit of Spanish anyway with the Chile links. But I imagine obviously it's been a bit of a culture shock for him to come back to England, to familiar surroundings. Hopefully he does well, and I wish him all the best. I know there would be some Rovers fans who don't, but he's a bit of a cult hero for us with the whole Brereton Diaz thing and turning Chile whilst he were with us, and all the kind of fanfare around that.
Jacob Blackburn, Rovers C's contributor. Always good to get you on the channel. Thank you very much for sharing your opinion. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you for having me, Hal. I hope to come back on soon when there's another Rovers Sheffield United link, I suppose.
Absolutely. Who knows in the future? Let me know, Blades, how do you feel about this one? Put your thoughts in the comments.